Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. What up? How's everybody doing today?
Greetings,
Good.
Earthlings.
Living the dream.
Sun is shining. It's wintertime, and anytime the sun is shining in the winter, I feel like it's a pretty good day.
That's true.
Yeah.
Can't complain about that. I'm trying to remember, you said living the dream, and I said something. I went to the doctor's the other day, and what did I say to him? And he was very concerned for my mental health. I'll come up with it.
We need to know what that was that you said.
Right. So I can not repeat it when they ask me how I'm
He
doing.
was like,
Yes.
that doesn't sound good. And I was like, no, it's great. I said, oh, I remember it. I said, the horrors persist, but so do I.
I mean, that's not a red flag. That's not a red flag at all.
Like
And he
something
was
from
like-
like a Victorian journal.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
that doesn't
intense.
sound
Lovecraft.
good. And I was like, no, but like, so do I. And he was
Yeah, you missed the second part.
like, so that's greet people that way these days. The horrors persist, but so do I.
Alexis Lovecraft, author and horticulturalist.
Also, horror is hard to say in a sentence, I have found.
It
Horror.
is. It is.
Well,
It's a tough
Or
one.
like rural juror.
Yes.
Mm,
Rural
throwback.
juror.
For some
Yeah.
reason, a lot of the other podcasts I listen to have people from the Northeast, and they really struggle to say the word rural. Like they're like rural.
Roll away.
And the more you think about it, the worse it becomes. Yes.
Absolutely. It's just the R's, man. The R's are hard. So this
Hards.
is a bald boy episode.
Just
It
what
is.
constitutes a bald boy episode exactly?
It's their wheelhouse. They're spitting stats at us
Bars.
today.
Mm.
Bars.
You got lots of numbers and things and programs and softwares and things.
Mhm. Calculations,
Ooh,
spreadsheets.
calculations and spreadsheets.
Yeah, but
Everyone's
that's
just
exciting
like,
in the
and
wintertime.
I'm gone. Done. Don't worry. It'll be
We
fun. I
just
promise.
lost those folks that might have been listening.
The horrors do persist, but so will you.
Yes.
The next
the numbers do
for the next
persist.
40 minutes, we'll be describing pie charts to you. So just close your eyes and imagine.
How about let's
Picture
just
a
drop
pizza,
charts
but
and
it's
just
not
describe
divided
some pies.
equally.
Drop
And it's-
charts and describe some pies. Yeah.
Hopefully, yeah.
I
So
can talk about some pies.
we're talking about the Horticulture Biz Quiz,
Mhm.
which maybe it's helpful to start out just conceptually what we were trying to get at. So, Alexis, Ray, do you all as agents occasionally hear things from producers, questions like, so I just got 10 acres, or I'm thinking about 10 acres getting them. What do I do to that?
Yeah.
10
In
acre?
fact, that was the very first episode, I believe, that we ever did as a group on this podcast was, just on that same topic. But
Yeah,
that's a common question. And more than anything, they're just looking for a way to frame things or a way to think about things with some kind of structure. What should they be thinking about? I mean, I guess that's what it boils down for me is they're asking me what should they be thinking about at that point in time. That's a lot
Yeah,
of
it's a
in
very
lot of cases.
regular question for us.
Yeah, it's common.
Yeah. So another just quick question, side note: have you all noticed a lot of people moving into your counties from out of state more so than usual, more so than in the past?
I have Hawaiians and New Yorkers and who else? Pennsylvania, and I have several from California that lost their homes in in the fire, and so they were like, "We're going to relocate to Kentucky."
Let's go to a
And
place
so-
that has water.
Yeah, let's go somewhere that it doesn't, burn. So yeah, I've got a lot in my area, and I've got a small college in our town, so I think that helps a little bit. But recently, in the past probably 5 years or so, we've had a lot of implants around Boyle County.
I always notice when we have someone. I mean, of course, we're a big horse industry county, and that brings folks traveling into and out of the county. The population stays fairly stable in the county that I am in. But yeah, I've noticed a little bit of that. I don't know if it's just me becoming aware of that and becoming more sensitive when someone mentions that they're from out of town. But just last week, I talked to a couple of folks that were from out of town. And it's interesting what brought them to a couple factors, family changes. Daughter kind of grew up, went to college here in the States, and they moved from Texas to Kentucky. and then they had large farm operation out in Texas. But one of the motivations for not doing that particular activity anymore, farming, was water rights and some complications there, or lack of access to water. But yeah, there's lots of different reasons why people move around. But I do see that even in the county I'm in.
Yeah, I've noticed that over the last few years, like at conferences and other things, just and then maybe it's a confirmation bias or I'm paying attention more, but I have noticed that, and the reason I even mention it is not for any sort of nativistic rabble rousing about all these people coming in or anything like that. It's because we try to remain aware of the types of audiences that we serve through the Center for Crop Diversification, and the ways that the horticulture folks or the diversified people or people maybe who are interested in certified organic or something along those lines, they're kind of a different crew than others, and their interests are different. And I think this a lot of these folks who are coming in from other places particularly jibe with some of the things that we offer. And so the CCD, just as a little brief backstory, the CCD was started under a very different name, New Crop Opportunity Center, back in 2000 after the
tobacco
settlement. Thank you. And the goal was partially to provide some quick hitting resources, publications, and other types of resources for people who were realizing they weren't going to be doing tobacco as much as they were in the past, to transition to potentially to other enterprises. It hasn't exactly worked out precisely in that way, but we did happen to have this big suite of publications that we've kept up to date over the last almost 2.5 decades. And that wasn't me. I've only been around the CCD since 2015, but it provided a really rich database for us to use to build this little tool that does essentially the same thing I just said, which is to take all of the potential horticulture operations and options and provide, like you said, Ray, some structure to considering them, weighing them, and evaluating your own strengths and weaknesses in light of those things. So that was the grand ambition of the Hort Biz Quiz. In reality, it's a pretty humble little tool that I think has been really useful to a number of people. And it essentially asks I describe it as a less cool, but similar to the BuzzFeed quiz that asks you, what Thanksgiving food is your personality type? Like those types of things.
Quiz.
They ask you questions about yourself.
Gravy.
And they send you something out on the back end, a quizzical or a quiz entertainment. I don't know what it's called.
So the questions, do they
Quizlet.
kind of direct people's thinking? Is that what kind of your
Exactly.
as people fill this out? Is that kind of going to direct them and give them things that they should be thinking about, sort of thing?
Yeah. That was the idea.
Yeah.
Was that we would
Awesome.
structure the questions to guide their thinking through, and importantly, at the end, spit out some recommendations of a few crops you might want to think about, a few crops you probably want to avoid. So, for example, if you don't have any access to any labor, please don't put out 5 or 10 acres of tomatoes.
If it's surprising how often that happens. I mean, that seems like a simple, straightforward statement not to do that, but it is absolutely incredible how many times that we work with folks. And some of that is just because they've never done it before and it's hard to conceptualize how much labor you need. But yeah, that's a big one. It's a big one.
Or like people who want to grow watermelons in their high tunnels.
Mm-hmm.
It's spoiler alert, watermelons generally, I mean, you can do anything, right? You can plant anything.
Right.
Don't tell me what I can do.
You can do anything once.
That's an example of a crop that grows really, really large amounts of foliage to support the amount of fruit that comes off of it. So that's more suited to someone who has expansive land available, for example. So Josh, Josh has spent more time with the actual data coming out of it. I had originally, Christy Cassidy and I had pulled together the original tool and have had it out there floating. And now we're 4 years in. Josh, maybe you want to talk a little bit about the structure and like the different categories of land and all land, labor, capital, all that kind of stuff, and just share some of the things we've seen from it.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, like Brett said, you answer these questions about the availability of capital you have to invest in a horticultural enterprise, how much space you have, and how much access to labor you have. And through that, it gives you some recommendations for things to consider and avoid. And those boundaries for whether or not somebody has access to enough capital, for example, is if they have more than $5,000 to invest, they would be considered to have access to. They are a yes to the answer of access to capital. If they have more than an acre to dedicate to a horticultural enterprise, then yes, land is not something that they're limited by. And labor, that was a little bit more difficult. Basically, there's categories of how would they characterize it, beyond how much labor do they have beyond what they can provide themselves. There's three answers: a little, a moderate amount, or a lot. Anybody who answered a moderate amount or a lot is said to have access to labor. And from that, and as Brett said, this quiz has been running, up and running and collecting responses for over 4 years at this point. Started August 1st, 2018, and so at the end of July 2023 is when we pulled the data and started kind of analyzing it a little bit to see what patterns exist and things like that. And also had kind of uncovered a way, because people have participated in this quiz from all over the world. We have answers from as far away as China or Afghanistan, and it wasn't exactly clear that we could kind of geographically assign where these answers were coming from easily, but uncovered a way to do that, to kind of just be able to develop categories for people who are answering from probably from within Kentucky, probably from within our region, probably from within the US, and then the kind of global data set. And to throw out some numbers, in that 4 year period, the from the global answers, there's almost 1,000 responses. It's like 942. From Kentucky alone, we have just under sorry, just over 400. So most of the answers in general, or just a large portion of them, are coming from Kentucky or from within the region. We decided that that would be Kentucky as well as all the states that Kentucky touches.
Mm-hmm.
And so that 61% of all responses were those people in that group. So it's very much kind of oriented to this group.
And just to be clear, the main reason we put it into effect was to use it as a tool for people to figure out where they fit and make decisions. Just like the price reports that we do, we weren't thinking of it as data set first. We were thinking of it as useful tool first. And so if you're a producer and you're interested in this, you go and you click the link, you spend 2 to 3 minutes and you get an answer, and that's it. It's so a lot of this more like the categories and stuff is interesting and cool for us to talk about. And we'll talk more about it, but that's one thing. And the other thing I just emphasize again that I didn't do a very good job with earlier is just essentially it's investigating whether you have land, labor, and capital. These are three important pieces of any enterprise of any sort that's going to rely on
That's sort of
land.
the big puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
And maybe someone hasn't thought about it in those terms, and even that has value, even starting to think about things, the big puzzle pieces, in those terms. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other component is it doesn't in any way, and it's not meant to, but it doesn't in any way ask or it kind of asks whether you've looked at it or not, but it doesn't provide any guidance on whether or not there actually is a market for the product that you're interested in growing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to grow broom corn and you want to grow 500 acres of broom corn, well, that you may have the land and the labor and the capital to be able to do that, but where are you going to sell that much broom corn? That's
there is a different program or different publication.
It's a different thing, and there is a question in it that asks you whether you considered it or whether you've considered your market or not. But ultimately, it's not one of the main variables. But it's been. I'm kind of curious what y'all's experience has been with it.
I think one of the most beneficial things. So, people are coming to us to ask these questions, and so we start. If before the Hort Biz Quiz, we were the Biz Quiz, right? As agents,
Yeah.
people would come in and say, what do I do? And I said, well, how much land you got? We'd ask all these questions. And I think the Hort Biz Quiz did a good job of making those questions easier and simplifying them.
Like
and
a first
getting,
contact kind of thing.
yeah. And so when I get those questions, that's the first thing I send them to, because what I tell people, and, I kind of walk them through. Sometimes we do it on the phone. Like they're on the phone doing it. We do it together. They come in and we do it together. But like you said, it makes them think about all of these things. But then when they get the answers, if it's, something they had already thought of, then great. Like it's kind of an automatic, like, this is what we should be doing. And then we start talking about the market, about a soil test, about all that kind of stuff. Sometimes
it's like getting their buckets in place.
Yeah.
Like
it opens
it's like,
up
here's
doors.
The buckets we're going to talk about.
Right. They never thought about. And sometimes it's like, it gives them kind of a rude awakening a little bit. Like, they're like, well, I've had people call me and they're like, I've taken it 3 times and I've not gotten what I thought what I wanted to do. And I'm like, well, you can do whatever you want to do. Like, by all means, we will help you with that.
Here's
but
going to be the challenges.
Maybe this is a sign from the universe, right? So a little bit. And I think it's just really, I'm such a big fan of it. And I spit it to everybody that I can. That is just, even if you don't get the answers you want, I think it makes you think about those different areas to start that are important.
It's a
wow.
It leaves us in a good spot to talk about
an endorsement that good.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, right.
Not have paid for a better endorsement.
Some of the toughest contacts on a county level, in a field kind of perspective, is that first contact. And and some people come to us with all sorts of different experiences. Some people have a lot of experience, and then there's some of those folks that don't have any experience, and that's the ones I think tools like this can help us as field agents, but also help us help others.
Yeah.
So it is a good tool, and it's one that I recommend a lot.
So if you're new or you want to start, even if you're not new to farming, but you want to start a new enterprise, like you can still use this even if you are already growing
have experience,
watermelons and you're like, what else could I maybe do? And it's just what you're thinking. And it's a good thing to take in, to your local extension office, is just be like, this is what I came up with. I love that when people bring me that printout or that list. And then I can go through with my experience on growing each of those and be like, well, you had mentioned to me earlier that you didn't really love, bending over to pick stuff. So either you're going to have to invest in a bean picker, or maybe we'll go with the second thing on your list, which is, apples, or whatever that is. And so you can just dive in deeper, I think, a lot faster with the Biz Quiz. I don't know. I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of it. I tell everybody about it. So you're welcome for those numbers.
Thank you for that. No, that was one of the things that because this is a little bit of the reflection on extension, but Josh and I work at the campus level. So in theory, we're supporting out in the state. And I've always said my primary audience or my primary clientele are agents, because there are in Kentucky, we have agents in every county. And so the things that we can do to help them in their job of supporting other people, that was kind of the main goal. And so one of the things that it spits out in the, you got a lot of labor, consider growing these things. One of the things it says is, here is how you find your county agent's contact information. You can print this out, take it to them. And it also helps with the awkward conversation of asking them how much money they want to put into something, like, okay. And it puts a little bit of boundaries on, like, what is a lot of money? That's something I struggle with in a lot of things, where people be like, oh, that thing was really expensive. And I'm like, so was it like $100 or like $100,000? Because I have no idea what you're talking about.
It could be either,
expensive. Because you're not, and you mentioned that, Ray, being like not familiar with this. And so, Josh came up with he's, like I said, he's been doing some analytics stuff with some of this, and came up with kind of these different categories.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to talk about the categories first, or do we want to go and maybe just click through the report and I can kind of read the questions and answer to kind of give a sense?
I feel like reading the questions first would help frame the categories.
Yeah.
Perfect. That was what I was hoping you would say. I was
you led us into that.
Well,
confirmation received.
Well framed question.
Yes.
So you can find this. It's just it's right on the homepage of the Center for Crop Diversification, right at the top. It's the uky.edu/ccd, and there's a graphic at the very top that's kind of got some clip arty stuff, and it says "Take the Hort Biz Quiz," and I clicked on that, and it opens up a thing that says, "Hello, welcome CCD, Hort Council, UK, etc." And so you go ahead and click through, and it'll ask you what county you're in. It'll ask if are you growing horticultural crops at present? And so you could say yes or no on that. Asks you what horticulture crops do you grow? If you answer no, then it won't show you that. And then do you want to grow horticulture crops as part of a business? And in other words, to make money? That's a question that we end up answering it and talking about it in an extension a lot. But it's something that I bring up in a lot of when I go out and talk to people, because even at a farmer's market, there are people who are at that market, not because they want to sell, because they want to make money. It's because they want to have something to do. It's almost like a retirement hobby thing. And I think that plays a lot sometimes in our pricing issues, that people don't price things high enough because their goal, or they might have a more of a missional goal where they're trying to get more fresh produce into their community through this mechanism. And so they're not trying to make money or do it as part of a business. And that's great. We are in the business of supporting everyone regardless of what their goals are, but there's a lot of confusion and heartache and other things that come with not admitting from the get-go that I don't really care about making money, or I do care about making money, and so I'm going to need to make some more ruthless decisions than maybe I would like to. So anyway, that's the spirit of that question. And then let's see, how would you rate your current knowledge of growing horticultural crops? This is all kind of background information. And so the way that I clicked it through there, saying I don't know, I don't have any interest, I don't really want to sell or anything like that, it spits out an answer that says it appears you may not be ready to grow horticultural crops for sale. So that's
good to know, because some hort crops are a bit more complicated than others and very unforgiving.
Yep. Yes. Because if you don't have any experience growing stuff, then there's no point in going beyond that, because you're gonna be depending on producing a result that you've literally never produced before.
Right. So if I answer scale, just try something
you can go back and change your answers to see, within the session, to see if you mess something up or whatever. So I went back and changed my experience level and said I was a more advanced grower. Do I have a specific crop in mind? Do you have a specific market in mind for your enterprise? What market do you have in mind? How much capital do you have to commit to this enterprise? So this is what we're getting to what Josh was saying, where this is where the categorizations really starts. Mm-hmm. And that is none, $1 to $5,000, $5,001 to $10,000. So more than $5,000, but less than $10,000. $10,000 to $15,000, or more than $15,000. And at this point, Josh, you're saying we are saying that there's basically two categories. There's people who have less than $5,000, or people who have more than $5,000. And in that case, we're considering the less than $5,000 to be a little bit more capital constrained, and the more than $5,000 to have access to some capital to really think about some of the more capital intensive ventures.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's one. So that's, do you have capital? Yes, or we take this more, subtle gradations of money, and we turn it into a yes, you've got a decent amount of capital, or no, you don't. That's not a strength in your current portfolio, is having a lot of money to put toward this. So that's one. So I'm going to say for this one here that I have $5,000 to $10,000. It seems like you have access to some capital. Of the following, which most closely describes your access to land? I have no plans to own or lease land. I'm planning to lease or purchase land. I'm currently leasing, or I currently own. So I'm going to say that I currently own land, and it says, how much land do you have? And the answer here being I'm going to say 1 to 5 acres, but it's less than 1 acre, 1 to 5, or more than 5. For horticulture in Kentucky, 5 acres of anything is a pretty good amount. Mm-hmm. Would you all agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
100%.
I mean, I think it's a lot anywhere. It just depends on what the other
scale. Mm-hmm.
And so then it takes me to this thing that says, okay, so I indicated that I had some capital. I had more than $5,000 in my case, and I have access to some, and I do or will have access to land. So then it asks me, how much labor do I have? And I say, okay, I have a lot, I have a moderate amount, or I have little to none. And this is it says, how much labor can you access besides yourself? So I'm going to say for me, I have a moderate amount of labor. Then I click through, and okay, now I've come to my results page here. Now my results page is suggesting to me that I have access to capital, I have access to land, and I have access to labor. And then it gives a little blurb here. Having access to capital means you may be able to invest in equipment, branding, and marketing and other startup costs. Land access, whether through rent or through ownership, is a huge advantage. And generally, horticulture operations don't require massive amounts of land, but having some is a really good start. There's no getting around it. Horticulture crops are labor intensive, though. Since you have access to at least some labor, you have an advantage as you start your operation. Don't forget to account for the costs to pay that labor, especially if you are limited in starting capital. And so it has your next steps where you can print or screenshot your results. And then there's a little bit of additional resources page, but it says here, this is where it would say typical, types of crops. It's saying, because you have everything, basically, you're one of the lucky ones, you're in a position to grow anything that you have the market to support. And since you're planning to sell your crops, it's imperative you identify your markets before you plant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If I had answered anything differently to any of those, like for instance, if I had said that I didn't have access to labor, it would give me some things based on I have capital, I have land, maybe something like watermelons or something like butternut squash or something like that. So anyway, you could just see, you can go through and answer questions and get this little kind of pithy answer spit out at the end, and it will help guide the conversation. So Josh, you want to maybe go in a little bit to some of the archetypes or the different considerations and maybe throw out a couple of them, and we can think about crops that maybe we would suggest or not suggest or something like that?
You mean as far as like what the breakdown kind of responses are, or just
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
okay.
Do you have Kentucky numbers handy?
Let's see, these ones that I'm looking at. Yeah. Let me pull those up. But more or less, even the global numbers are heavily skewed towards Kentucky. But I will say that across the board, wherever they are, they follow the same kind of patterns, or they're very similar. Like Kentucky isn't wildly different than the kind of U.S. responses. But like for example, the one that you just gave, somebody who's unconstrained by capital, land, or labor, that represented 20% of all Kentucky responses.
So 20% of people have land, labor, and some capital.
Yeah.
Wow, that sounds pretty good. Pretty good so far. 20%. That seems significant.
Yeah, the largest group of or archetype were the ones that are capital constrained and labor constrained, but not land constrained. They have at least an acre, but they don't have any labor besides themselves, and they're operating with less than $5,000 in investment capital.
What was the percent of that?
A quarter of all responses.
Wow. Yeah. That checks out in my experience. Because that's sort of the unspoken background of, I just bought 10 acres or I have 10 acres. What do I do now? Well, I also don't have any money and I don't have any labor. So what do I do?
Yeah. In my mind, when I talk to folks in that category, it's sort of the way I look at it in my mind. As I click through the conversation that I'm having with whoever at that time, is they're aspirational, but they're also transitional, because usually when someone is in that situation, I'll say, well, don't make any drastic life changes. It may be that you try this out. Since you do have some resources, you can try out things, realizing what, the limiting factors are, and maybe slowly scale up or slowly ramp up. And that's sort of how I handle that. And we kind of talk about that rather than jumping in with huge risks because you have land resources, for instance. I mean, that's pretty exciting to some folks, and it's pretty exciting to me if you have land resources. But the other two factors are really important also. If you don't have a lot of capital to lose, it obviously may change how you look at risk. So you kind of go into things. Certain enterprises just aren't appropriate. Maybe green beans or something that's fairly cheap to get into, and you can make some profit from and learn the business. I mean, yeah, it really guides me. These answers and these categories do in my mind.
And right on their heels, the other group that's almost as big, say 24%, in the Kentucky responses is the ones that have land and have some access to labor but are capital constrained.
Yeah. Well, I think in both of those cases, everybody always kind of wants to get started as soon as possible, or they get this itch to start. And I get that myself. I get excited about stuff, and usually, if this is your second career, or if this is your family's home place, and you want to turn it into doing something different, or whatever the reason is, it's often very exciting. I think in both of those cases would benefit enormously from doing some business planning, exploratory business planning, and market exploration. And I think in the meantime, you could be doing some of the techniques and approaches like we've talked about, things like cover cropping or things like soil testing, and getting a sense of what the land is and what it can be used for. Maybe trying your hand, depending on how much experience you have. If you haven't grown, there is a difference between growing 10 tomato plants and 1,000 tomato plants. There's a difference between growing 10 tomato plants, 1,000 tomato plants, and 2 acres of tomatoes. There really is a growing pain. There are growing pains associated with those things. And so that's where some of the bridge markets, things like a farmer's market, or things like a local grocer, some other kind of that type of output, or maybe doing some canning or something like that, can be useful as you start to build the skills and don't get into such a rush to make money. Because if you bought the land and you say, I got to make money off of this because I bought the land, well, that means you made a bad decision in terms of your business planning. If you don't know how you're going to make money off the land and you bought it in this case. And I mean, I'm not, we'll work with you and help, but in general, if you're in a situation where you're just you have the land, you have access to it, maybe you don't have the capital yet, thinking about saving, thinking about business planning, does that sound like a reasonable recommendation from y'all's perspective? Any other
I think
thoughts
there's a
on that?
lot of research to be done, and I tend to be a pull the trigger kind of person. I mean, I like to do a lot of research, but I think that there's you can I forget, there's a saying about it, but like you can scare yourself by collecting too much information. So at some point you got to do something, right?
Yeah.
And I think that something could be cover cropping, or making connections in the market, seeing where you're going to sell. So sometimes doing something is not even yet to the actual growing of the product yet, which is nice for people like me who just like want to do something. You can do something productive and that will help you in the future, without having to like jump in and be like, I've only ever grown 15 tomato plants, but I just put out 1,000 and I have no tractor, and I
no market.
no market. Yeah,
Right.
not that you have to have a tractor,
No
but
storage space.
no storage space. I don't have
Yeah.
a cooler. I don't have. So spend some time doing that research. And if you're the kind of person who wants to do something, remind yourself that research is something. And then, if you just need to put some seeds out, put out some cover crop, or, make connections with your neighbor who has, a nice tiller if you're going to till, or, where you're going to get your compost from if you're going to do, no till. A lot of that can be done in the first year or so, and then you just kind of save in order to move forward in year 2 and year 3, and pivot, if it's not working for you. I think a lot of farmers, I've said this before, are not doing what they were doing in even year 3. They're not doing in year 5, because they're fine tuning it based on their market, based on what they enjoy doing. As Brett always reminds me, right? This is about also the joy of growing. And I'm grateful for him for reminding me. But
That guy sounds like he sounds
God, he's so
insufferable.
annoying. But what you enjoy doing and what you enjoy growing. So just, kind of give yourself a little bit of freedom to do that. But with a business plan in place, and those people like K-Cart that we've talked to, you can be doing something without actually, putting pedal to the metal kind of thing.
Sometimes it's better to just dip your toe in rather than jump in not knowing how deep the water is. And that's hard to do. It's hard to throttle back. And I've seen scenarios in both kind of folks that have jumped in and survived and did okay. And those that did that and they had such a bad experience that they did not continue with whatever they were doing in farming or producing whatever. And that's a kind of a sad scenario. Money was lost and some stress was developed. And that's what we're trying to avoid is, making smart decisions, smart moves. And that's kind of what it's all about.
Yeah, just real briefly before we get back to some of the other stuff with the biz quiz, something Alexis was talking about where, she said it's a casual thing to her now because of her experience, but that idea of talking to your potential customers and markets, I think that's one of the more, like, it sounds really straightforward and simple, and in many ways it is, but it's something that people often don't do, and
it's
so
scary.
then they will build things based on an assumption that a market is going to be there. Like an example would be, oh, there's all these local breweries, so I know there's going to be a demand for hops. So I'm just going to grow hops, and then when I have the hops, I'll call the breweries and let them know. Well, you talk to the breweries and you realize actually they have very little use for fresh hops, and if you're not able to dry them and pelletize them or turn them into cakes and market them at a significantly competitive price with the Yakima Valley, which has a competitive advantage on growing the things in the first place and economies of scale, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Turns out it's really, really challenging to market hops, even though they grow like weeds and there are a lot of local breweries. The assumption that the market will be there can be it can be a really devastating thing. Similar kind of thing with the apples. Oh, I have apples. I assume I can just take them to a cidery and have them turn it into cider and sell it to people. I don't know why all my examples are booze. Maybe it's the holiday season.
There's a theme here, Brett.
It's a holiday
really
season.
Strong theme.
But in reality, a lot of the high end cideries are using non-dessert apples, so they're using cider specific apples, and the ones that are using regular dessert apples, like an eating apple, they may do that once a year. It's not really a reliable thing, and in other words, you have this kind of these leaps of logic between perceiving something happening in the world and there must be a market for this. And sometimes there is. Sometimes it is. There are opportunities, and the naysayers and like me who are just trying to help people avoid heartache can shut conversations down too early. And so don't take for granted that the local brewery won't buy your hops, but you got to go talk to them and make sure that they will. And figure that out as part of that conversation. That's just the setting up the markets thing that was mentioned in the biz quiz, and Alexis mentioned it. I just wanted to touch on. But so Josh, I'm kind of curious, any other insights or things that jumped out or that you wanted to share from the data?
Yeah, something that stood out to me as I was starting to put it together is that, and I mean, with a lot of data analysis, it's like an answer comes to you and you're like, oh, well, duh, I guess. Like, I should have noticed this. But one of the things that stood out to me as I was putting it together is that, most people, the overwhelming majority, and by that I mean, let's see, about 50, 70, about 90% of the responses, access to land, access to at least 1 acre wasn't a problem. Like land access not being a significant obstacle in engaging in horticultural production.
That's good, because without that, maybe severely limited.
Right. And I remember seeing some of the groups are really tiny, like people who, they have less than an acre to work with, and not much labor, but they have plenty of money. That's less than 0.5% of the answers fit into that kind of category.
Yeah. It makes me wonder too. So I think to give it some context to what you're saying, I think with groups like the Young Farmers Coalition and anybody thinking about transition and sustainable agriculture, access to land, if you don't have it in your family, is a major, major issue for a lot of those groups.
Big time.
But I've always kind of wondered, because a lot of those movements, conversations, all of that, it happens at a national level, and it happens in places where the land market is frankly more competitive than it is in the state of Kentucky. Right. And so, I don't know if we are, on one end of that, based on these data, it seems like, we're at one end of a spectrum as compared to somebody trying to purchase something in the Central Valley, California, or somebody trying to maybe get some good flat non-flooding land in Florida or something.
Right.
I don't know. That is interesting though.
Yeah. And I mean, the responses are people who are interested in engaging in horticultural production. Like they already
Right.
have that going for them, so they're probably going to be people who are at least somewhat associated or connected to agricultural production in some way. And
Right.
1 acre is
Not very much.
it's yeah, even
Accessible.
in the like on the mini episode, Brett and I talk about. I spent some time in Japan, but I mean, so much to say that the average farm size is, I think, globally somewhere around 2 acres.
Mm-hmm.
It's the some our large farm size is not necessarily our average large farm size in the U.S. or even in Kentucky are not necessarily representative of kind of farms in general.
Mm-hmm.
That a lot of these crops can be
Kentucky's
grown.
Kentucky's considered, small, one of the small farm capital, states, and it's like
Mhm.
140, I think, ish.
Yeah,
is the
I think
new
currently it's like
average.
160, and like US is around 500 acres.
It's
Yeah.
I understand, and we're talking about horticulture here. Obviously, it's the Hort Biz Quiz and stuff like that. But what is the average of horticulture farms? I think obviously
Right.
in California and Florida and places like that, you are dealing with hundreds of acres of cabbages and all
Right.
Seems
all
like
those
even in
kinds of things.
horticulture, you
But
would have to know what the thing about horticulture. It's amazing to me. I've never been able to get at that, and that's an awesome question, Alexis. Is that even in hort, you have to break it down per crop. What's the average size of strawberry farm? What's the average size of tomato farm?
Mhm.
It's so specialized, you can't just look at it as a monoculture like corn. What's the average, field corn,
and
field or
it's
whatever?
so intensive too. I mean, that's the
Mhm.
other thing to
Yes,
keep in mind, that
absolutely.
you can make the same amount of money. I'm just spitting right now, but you can make a lot of money off an acre of tomatoes that it may take
Yeah.
10 acres of corn to do. There's, again, the economy
Mhm.
of scale, all that kind of thing, and there's a lot more labor involved, but there's
Right. Or like
also
5 acres of greenhouse production.
right.
Right.
But and then
Yeah.
also
5
thinking
acres is
about
different, yeah.
what you're going back to, what your market is today. For some reason, like, markets have just been hitting me from like all different sides and different conversations. But what is your market? If you want to do wholesale and go back to, okay, this is what it told me I should grow based on what I have access to, I'm going to grow watermelons. Do you want to grow watermelons for Walmart, or do you want to grow watermelons for the farmer's market? And what is your personality as far as how many people you want to talk to? What do you enjoy doing? Do you work a full-time job? Like, there's so many social aspects that I think come into that. And then deciding, okay, I'd rather do wholesale. So an acre of watermelons might not cut it if you're going to do large scale wholesale.
Right.
And so that also, I think, comes into play. And, like, not to add all those millions of things up, but that's the purpose of the Hort Biz Quiz, is to kind of get
Yeah.
you to some point so that it makes it easier to have those other conversations about your market and
Stimulates
your
conversation.
personal
Yeah.
needs
Yeah.
and wants.
And that's an important thing. And we had talked about it earlier, that the recommendations or the recommendations to engage in or avoid aren't necessarily written in stone, and that it's just teaching or advising you, to a potential grower, to consider what might be a struggle, what might be something they have to plan around. If you really have your heart set on something that has a labor intensive harvest, then is a U pick or ag tourism angle a way to get into it? Right? Like, it's just encouraging you to think this is going to be an obstacle for you, so you have to figure out a way around it.
Yeah, it's more of, I like that. I like the word encouragement, Josh, because it just, like, points out where you could have some problems and, like, things to work on, ahead of time. I love that word. When I started, like, flower farming, before I was really flower farming, I was doing, like, just florist work. And the beauty of florist work is that you get paid before you do the work, right? You get paid, and so you don't have any really inputs. Like, yeah, when you get started, you may have to buy some vases and stuff, but a lot of that, you can charge that person.
And then ghost them.
And so, and then
Or no,
go
Then
back.
we don't do
disappear.
that.
Adios.
Yeah, but
Wasn't in the biz quiz, ghosting. Weird.
ghosting was not in the business. But what it did was, it paid for itself, right? Like, everything I put in, it was already paid for, like, instantly. And so
Like, it's
I was
almost like a
able to kind of,
CSA.
exactly like a
Yeah.
CSA. So you're able to have that money, save that money to put towards something else. Now I was working another job, I had privileges in that way, but something along those lines, like a CSA. Now, granted, don't go run a CSA if you've never grown a tomato before,
Yeah.
for the love of God.
It's a high operational and production and marketing complexity is why.
Yeah, that's
all the complexities.
Yeah, we you know what? We should do a whole episode on just like CSAs. Have we done that yet? And just like the complexities of CSAs.
That'd be good. We'd be coming up on sign up season too.
Yeah. They're phenomenal and awesome. But we should just do a pros and cons of CSAs.
I'm a CSA member.
Yep.
Well, and just fleshing out anymore. Look at Biz Quiz, what it's doing to us. It's even stimulating conversation here on this podcast. But even what is a CSA? Because there's so many different kind of variations of
big
CSAs.
Question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I used to think I knew what a CSA was, but there's so many. I mean, the spirit is there, but the letter, the specifics of CSAs are so different now. And I would love to do a podcast on that.
We've got some connections with the National CSA Innovation Network, and I think they have a relatively new executive director that I don't know why I said I think. I just met her at a conference, and so maybe we can see if she would want to join us, maybe to talk about CSA as a champion.
I would be interested in that.
Love it.
For selfish reasons.
Anything else? I mean, if we haven't convinced you yet to go take the Biz Quiz, if you're not sure, if you're looking into having a horticulture business of some kind.
I just have a question for Brett and Josh real quick. Alexis and I may have a different perspective because obviously people in front of us, if they're taking it and we know that they've taken it, we're working with them. But you guys, as you're working with agents mostly, it sounds like, Brett and Josh, what's the next step beyond once you get some information from Biz Quiz? I mean, is there a logical next tool or next publication or next thing that you usually step agents into or step producers into beyond Biz Quiz?
Yes. So I think one of the things that we have that we talked about on that very first episode, and we used it as a structure there, but it's this what to think about before you plant. And it's to Alexis's point about how in some cases you do in fact get paid before you even do the thing. And a lot of farming stuff, if you don't have relationships set up and you haven't figured out what the markets are going to look like, you are literally putting something in the ground with the hope, I guess, that it will sell somewhere. And so the ideal situation is you have something sold before you even put it in the ground, and all you got to do is make sure it gets from seed to product and get it out there and go. Not always exactly possible, but projections and planning and all that kind of stuff is good. So that's one publication we always recommend going to immediately after that. If there are crops that are suggested to you by your output, you can go and check out the crop profiles from the Center for Crop Diversification. You can also just go and look for if any of those strike your fancy, or if you're able to see maybe a pattern. So for instance, if the recommendation that comes out to you is watermelons and winter squash, well, you might also check out things like cantaloupe or things like other types of melons or other types of, expansive cucurbits of some sort that have a bulk harvest season that's pretty short. But go and explore those different crop profiles. It doesn't have to be just the Center for Crop Diversification. There's other things within Extension, both in the Horticulture Department at UK, but also in other horticulture departments and places like that. That's another place to, I think, go and explore afterward. I think in general, to me, the crop selection is important, but I know we've hammered it, but the marketing and market stuff is where we see people struggle the most, because we happen to have a climate that, yes, we have some disease pressure and weeds love it here, but in general, it's a pretty good place to grow stuff. And so you're likely going to be able to figure out how to grow it. Marketing it is the thing that people really, really struggle with. And so that's just that thing I would spend some time on there, but and reach out to your county agent. I mean, it's in the Biz Quiz output. It really is a great reference. I mean, it really is a great resource that's available to you. But those are as far as to the producers. But I think to your point too, Ray, and this is something maybe Josh, you have some thoughts on this too. It tells us a little bit about what types of resources we need to be thinking about developing, trainings or guides or future publications. if land access isn't overly an issue for a lot of our horticulture producers, but labor and capital are, or capital is, then that means we need to be thinking about developing things either about borrowing, because if you need to borrow money to start, that might be the thing you need to do. And the other thing is how can we think about low capital intensive approaches to make maybe a larger variety of crops available or something like that, or even work at a state level with some of our ag development, Kentucky Office of Ag Policy and other people to think about targeting funds and pools of availability, or if those funds are available, maybe better advertising them out to people to make sure they're aware of low interest rate loans and or grants. But yeah, I don't know, Josh, did you have anything that like as far as future programming, your creative type, any like?
I mean, it definitely kind of like what you touched on about letting this kind of be a guide, or some of these responses, letting them guide where to prioritize programming, to see that, oh, well, a large portion of the population, or people who are interested in engaging in horticultural production, here are some crops that fit with them, like, say, cauliflower or broccoli or something like that, to understand that those are, we should make sure that those resources are kept updated, and to let that just kind of guide how we direct so we can reach the most amount of people kind of where they're at, rather than getting too into certain like niche guides or something. And it definitely, like, for a specific example, is if somebody's going to get into fruit tree production, if land access isn't really what the limiting factor is it as important to go into kind of like highly technical kind of trellised dwarf systems, or is standard more appropriate? Those kind of things. But I think we're just in our early stages of kind of letting this feedback kind of come in our direction, and think about how we can structure programming.
Well, huge shout out to you, Josh, for doing a lot of the work to make the information useful. This is happening to me over and over again, where we start things and don't really realize the full potential, and you've definitely made it into something that's much more strategically informative. So big shout out to fellow bald boy Josh.
Thanks. I just like spreadsheets.
It's a big spreadsheet.
I like
what a nerd.
Man, some of the maps that you did in that report. Oh, maybe we could just plug real quick. There will be a couple of publications with some of these data coming out in this spring, so you can take a look and just kind of see. It's really interesting stuff. I think it helps you to contextualize, and we can put in add in some of the stuff we've talked about today, specifically saying like, maybe even including what types of crops are recommended for each of the categories. So you don't have to just go through and get your answer. You can see the cheat sheet for all of them. But
yeah, I do have that cheat sheet in front of me, but it's not. It'd be a good addition to the publication.
Yeah, awesome.
Cool.
Well, I don't have anything else. I think that was
lots of good information, guys.
I'm excited
I love
about
these tools.
This tool.
It's just fun to play with. Sometimes I'm just like, I wonder what I get today.
As agents, it's really a good support mechanism. Not only the entire CCD side, the crop diversification side, and all the many resources, but specifically tools like this as we work with newer producers or producers that are undertaking new enterprises.
We hope it's just the beginning. Guys. We hope it's just the beginning.
Whoop, whoop. All right, everyone. Well, we will close out here. If you've got any questions, thoughts, future episode ideas, you want to tell us how awesome we are, you can leave us a review for one. If you want to tell us how awesome you are, that would be great. Helps other people find us. If you want, have ideas, have questions, we've got some people who will be like, hey, I need to plant my onions. Is it a good time of year to do that? We've gotten those emails. That's perfectly fine. You can shoot us one at hortculturepodcast@l.uky.edu. You can also follow along with us, shoot us a message, whatever you prefer on Instagram. Horticulture Podcast is our handle on there. And so we'd love to hear from you guys. And we appreciate you being here with us today. And we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us. And we hope you'll join us next week. Have a good one.